This is my presentation on the femur and the femur's function in the skeletal system. What is the skeletal system, you may ask? The skeletal system is made up of your bones, your joints, your cartilage, and ligaments. Your skeletal system is divided into two separate skeletons, your axial skeleton and your appendicular skeleton. The primary function of the skeletal system is to provide support for the body. I have a voiceover for you to hear.
The human skeletal system is one of the 11 systems in the human body. The skeletal system consists of all the bones, cartilage, tendons, and ligaments in the body. Altogether, the skeleton makes up about 20% of a human's body weight. The human skeleton is divided into two parts, the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. The axial skeleton is made up of the bones that form the vertical axis of the body and consists of the skull, which protects the brain and supports facial structure, the spine, which surrounds and protects the spinal cord and supports the head, the rib cage, which surrounds and protects the organs within the chest, including the heart and lungs. The appendicular skeleton consists of our shoulders, our upper and lower limbs, and our hip bones. I've provided a diagram that depicts the appendicular and axial skeleton. In the diagram, blue represents the axial skeleton and pink represents the appendicular skeleton. Please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the distinguishment between the two parts of the skeletal system. While the primary function of the skeletal system is to provide support of the body, the skeletal system has other functions which include protecting our internal organs, storing and releasing fat, storing and releasing minerals, facilitating movement, and producing red blood cells. The skeletal system helps work in conjunction with the muscular system to maintain homeostasis by providing new red blood cells as the old ones die off. It also helps maintain the level of calcium in our bloodstream. Without the skeletal system, the body could not carry oxygen in the blood, which would negatively impact our body's ability to maintain homeostasis. Not to mention, our body would have no structure without our skeletal system.
So what are bones? The two basic types of bone tissue are compact bone and spongy bone. The type of bone cells are osteocytes, osteoblasts, and osteoclasts. Bones are classified by their shape. They could either be classified as long, short, flat, or irregular. I have another voiceover for you to hear.
What are bones, you may ask? Bones are rigid organs that constitute our skeleton and provide protection for the various organs of our body. Bones are living, growing tissues. It is important to understand that bone is made mostly of collagen and calcium. Collagen is a protein that provides a soft framework for bones, and calcium is a mineral that adds strength and hardens the framework for bones. This combination of collagen and calcium makes bones strong and flexible. There are two types of bone tissues. Compact bone forms the hard external layer of all bones. It provides protection and strength to bones. Compact bone tissue consists of units called osteons, which are cylinder structures that we will discuss later in the presentation. Meanwhile, spongy bones form the inner layer of all bones and are lighter and less dense than compact bone. Spongy bone tissue does not contain osteons that constitute compact bone tissue. Instead, it consists of trabeculae. The three types of bone cells that are important to know and understand are called osteoclasts, osteoblasts, and osteocytes. Osteoclasts are large cells that dissolve the bone. They come from the bone marrow and are related to white blood cells. They are formed from two or more cells that fuse together. Because of this, the osteoclasts usually have more than one nucleus. Osteoclasts are found on the surface of the bone mineral next to the dissolving bone. Osteoblasts, meanwhile, are the cells that form new bone. They also come from the bone marrow and are related to structural cells. They have only one nucleus. Osteoblasts work in teams to build bones. They produce new bone called osteoid, which is made of bone collagen and other protein. In addition, they control calcium and mineral deposition. Osteocytes are cells inside the bone. They also come from osteoblasts. Some of the osteoblasts turn into osteocytes while the new bone is being formed, and the osteocytes then get surrounded by the new bone. Lastly, it is important to know that bones are classified by their shape. I have provided a photo so that you can see how the bones are identified. Long bones are longer than they are wide. Short bones are usually square in shape or cube-like. Flat bones are curved, and irregular bones are oddly shaped. Think of your vertebrae, for example.
So what is your femur, you may ask? The femur is the only bone located within your human thigh. The femur is considered a long bone like what we spoke about earlier, and it is both the longest and strongest bone in your body. It extends from your hip to your knee, and the femur is considered to be a part of your appendicular skeleton, which we discussed earlier.
The femur is one of the 206 bones in the human skeletal system and is the only bone located within the human thigh. The femur is a part of our appendicular skeleton. The femur is the strongest bone in the human body and extends from the hip to the knee. The femur is considered a long bone because it's longer than it is wide. In fact, it's the longest bone in our body. The primary function of the femur is to support the weight of the body and allow for motion of the leg. However, there are other functions of the femur that we will discuss later in the presentation. I have provided a diagram that represents the femur in relation to other bones in our body. Spend a minute looking at the diagram and try pointing out where the femur is on your own body, so it will help make it easier to visualize when we discuss the femur's anatomical location in directional terms in the next few slides.
So what are anatomical terminology and what are directional terms? Well, anterior means in front of, posterior means behind, distal means away from or farthest from the origin, proximal means near or closest to the origin, superior means above, and inferior means below or under, lateral means toward the side, and medial means toward the midline.
To understand the anatomical location and description of the femur bone moving forward, it is imperative to familiarize yourself with anatomical directional terms. Directional terms are used to describe the precise location of features on the human body. It is important to learn the meaning of the following terms before we move forward. Superior means toward the head end of the body. For example, the hand is part of the superior extremity. The next directional term we need to learn is inferior. Inferior means away from the head. For example, the foot is part of the inferior extremity. The next directional term we need to learn is anterior. This means front. For example, the kneecap is located on the anterior side of the leg. The next directional term we need to learn is posterior. Posterior meaning back. For example, the shoulder blades are located on the posterior side of the body. The next directional term we need to learn about is medial. Medial means toward the midline of the body. For example, the middle toe is located at the medial side of the foot. The next directional term we need to learn about is lateral. Lateral means away from the midline of the body. For example, the little toe is located on the lateral side of the foot. The next directional term we need to learn about is proximal. Proximal means toward or nearest to the trunk or the point of origin. For example, the proximal end of the femur joins with the pelvic bone. The next directional term that we need to learn about is distal. Distal means away from the farthest from the trunk or the point of origin. For example, the hand is located at the distal end of the forearm.
So what is the anatomical location of the femur? The femur is the only bone located within the human thigh, and it articulates proximately with the acetabellum of the pelvis, which forms the hip joint, and it articulates distally with the tibia and patella, which forms the knee joint.
To understand the anatomical location of the femur in directional terms, you must be familiar with the anatomical location of the pelvis and patella and tibia. If you're familiar with the anatomical location of the pelvis and the patella and tibia, then you can familiarize yourself with the anatomical location of the femur. The proximal end, meaning the nearest point of origin of the femur, articulates proximally with the acetabellum of the pelvis, which forms the hip joint. The distal end, meaning the farthest from the point of origin of the femur, articulates distally with the tibia and patella, which forms the knee joint. Next slide, we will discuss the anatomical components and features of the femur that helps articulate the femur's anatomical location.
So, anatomical description of the femur consists of 3 parts: the proximal end, the shaft, and the distal end. The proximal end contains the head, the neck, and the lesser and greater trochanter. The shaft, meanwhile, contains the posterolateral surface and the posteromedial surface. The distal end contains the medial condyle and the lateral condyle and the intercondylar fossa.
The femur is composed of 3 parts: the proximal end, shaft, and distal end. The proximal end consists of the head, the neck, and the lesser and greater trochanter. The head of the femur comprises 2/3 of the sphere and sits supermedially and projects anteriorly from the neck of the femur. The head of the femur is connected to the shaft through the neck and articulates with the acetabellum of the pelvic bone. The femur's neck is between 4 to 5 centimeters long. The greater and lesser trochanter help facilitate the transition between the femur's head and neck. There are 2 lines that connect the greater and lesser trochanters on the anterior and posterior aspect. The greater trochanter is box-shaped and is the most lateral part of the femur. Meanwhile, the lesser trochanter is a cone-shaped extension of the lowest part of the femur neck. The shaft is the middle section of the femur and is the second part of the femur. The shaft has 2 surfaces: the posterolateral and the posteromedial surface. The posterolateral surface is limited anteriorly by the lateral border and posteriorly by the linea aspera. Meanwhile, the posteromedial surface is limited by the medial border anteriorly and the linea aspera posteriorly. Lastly, the distal end of the femur is made up of the medial and lateral condyles, which is defined as rounded protuberances at the end of the bones, and the intercondylar fossa. The lateral condyle is the most prominent condyle between the 2 condyles and acts as a point of attachment for the lateral collateral ligament. Meanwhile, the medial condyle helps aid as a point of attachment for the large adductor magnus, which is our powerful medial thigh muscle. Lastly, the intercondylar fossa is a groove that functions as a separation groove of the medial and lateral femoral condyles.
What type of cells make up the femur? So we discussed this a little bit earlier, and the same applies for the femur. The 3 types of bone cells are osteocytes, osteoblasts, and osteoclasts.
The 3 bone cells that make up the femur are the same 3 that we discussed at the beginning of the presentation. They are osteoblasts, osteocytes, and osteoclasts. If you were to look at the osteoblasts under a microscope like the image I've provided, you'll see that osteoblasts are cuticle cells and will have a purple-like appearance. They will also appear flat like a pancake. Osteocytes, meanwhile, will have a star-like shape, and that's how you can differentiate them. Lastly, osteoclasts have a streak-like appearance and are multinucleated cells.
What bone type of tissues make up the femur, you may ask? The 2 types of bone tissue are compact tissue and spongy or cancellous tissue.
The 2 bone tissues that make up the femur are compact tissue and cancellous tissue, otherwise known as spongy tissue. If you were to look at compact tissue under a microscope like the image I've provided, compact bone has a white appearance and is distinguishable by its cylinder/sudden hollow characteristics from the osteons. Meanwhile, cancellous tissue has a pink appearance and has many pores. It almost looks a lot like a kitchen sponge. Take a look at the diagram and try to distinguish the 2 for yourself.
So what are the functions of the femur? The functions of the femur are to support our body weight and allow for motion of our leg.
The femur plays a critical role in our day-to-day life. Without it, our lower body would be like jello, and we wouldn't be able to do simple tasks like walking. The two functions of the femur bone are to support our body weight and provide the ability for articulation and leverage for the leg. All the body's weight is supported by both of our femurs during activities like running, walking, jumping, and standing. Extreme forces act upon the femur, and the femur works in conjunction with the muscles and the hip and thigh that act on the femur to move the leg.
So how does the femur maintain homeostasis? The femur maintains homeostasis by producing new red blood cells, and it helps in the process of bone remodeling, and it provides a source of calcium and osteoblasts and osteoclasts.
Earlier in the semester, I did a research project about the skeletal system maintaining homeostasis. The femur has a similar way in maintaining homeostasis as other bones do in the skeletal system by producing new red blood cells as the old ones die off. Bone homeostasis is maintained by a balance between bone respiration by osteoclasts and bone formation by osteoblasts. Bone remodeling is the process bones constantly undergo by taking away and building tissue. This process is controlled by mechanical stress and hormonal negative feedback. Certain levels of calcium in the blood are needed for your nervous and muscle systems to function properly. Bone remodeling is the process of recycling calcium to maintain proper levels in your blood. The femur plays an important role in calcium homeostasis. Osteoblasts and osteoclast cells in the femur play an important role in bone remodeling. Osteoblasts not only play a central role in bone formation by synthesizing multiple bone proteins, but they also regulate osteoclast maturation by cognate interaction, which results in bone respiration, which is imperative for bone remodeling.
What might happen if the femur fails to maintain homeostasis? If the femur failed to maintain homeostasis, it would stop producing white blood cells, and it would stop producing red blood cells. In addition, it would stop calcium production and stop storing minerals.
If the femur failed to maintain homeostasis, the entire skeletal system would fail along with it. If this happened, it would stop producing red and white blood cells, stop storing minerals, and wouldn't provide the patient's body with support or protection. I would predict that the integumentary system would feel the effects the most. The integumentary system has an indirect relationship with the skeletal system to help keep bones strong. Skin in the integumentary system is responsible for producing vitamin D. Vitamin D regulates the carrier system that absorbs calcium. If the integumentary system was unable to absorb vitamin D, it would be detrimental to maintaining calcium homeostasis. Without vitamin D, bones would become soft since there would be no rotations of calcium being absorbed.
What is osteoporosis, and what demographic is at risk? Osteoporosis happens because the skeletal and integumentary system fail to maintain homeostasis. Bones fail to remodel because the rate of bone respiration is greater than bone formation. The causes of osteoporosis are estrogen deficiency and androgen deficiency in men. The primary demographic of osteoporosis is older women experiencing menopause or who are postmenopausal.
Like I mentioned before in my previous slide, the integumentary system has an indirect relationship with the skeletal system to keep bones strong. Skin in the integumentary system is responsible for producing vitamin D. Vitamin D regulates the carrier system that absorbs calcium. If the integumentary system was unable to absorb vitamin D, it would be detrimental to maintaining calcium homeostasis. Without vitamin D, bones would become soft since there wouldn't be rotations of new calcium being absorbed. Osteoporosis is a common disease that is caused when both the skeletal and integumentary system fail to maintain homeostasis. Osteoporosis negatively affects the density of bones because the skeletal system fails to remodel these bones. This happens when the rate of bone respiration is greater than bone formation. A lack of hormones, particularly estrogen in women and androgen in men, are the leading cause of osteoporosis. Estrogen deficiency is believed to have the most direct impact on osteoblasts and osteoclasts, which is why older women experiencing menopause or who are postmenopausal are the primary demographic of osteoporosis patients. Estrogen effects are mediated through one specific type of cell surface receptor called the estrogen receptor alpha. ERA binds and transports the hormone into the nucleus of the cell, where the receptor hormone complex acts as a switch to turn on specific genes. ERA receptors are found on the surface of osteoblasts, as is estrogen receptor related receptor alpha, which is also known as ERRA, which play an auxiliary role in regulating bone cells. However, osteoporosis is not limited to older women. Men also suffer from the disease. A lack of testosterone is the leading cause of osteoporosis, aka androgen deficiency. Testosterone is essential for optimal bone development and maintenance. Testosterone deficiency leads to the dysfunction of osteoblasts and osteoclast cells.
How does the anatomical and functional aspect of the femur change because of osteoporosis? Because of osteoporosis, the femur's spongy bone becomes thinner as well as the compact bone. Impacts of osteoporotic changes include the femur becomes brittle and the femur becomes super susceptible of being fractured.
Like I mentioned in previous slides, in a femur there is spongy bone inside the proximal and distal end of the femur bone, and compact bone along the outside of the shaft of the femur. When a patient has osteoporosis, the spongy bone becomes less dense, with bigger spaces forming between the bony structure of struts, which become thinner. In addition, there's thinning of the compact bone. Because of this, osteoporotic changes can mean your femur will become thin and brittle and are more likely to have a fracture. What was once the strongest bone in a patient's human body is no longer strong at all.
So what are treatment options for osteoporosis? Medications for osteoporosis include estrogen and testosterone replacement therapy and bisphosphonate medications like aldehyde. Natural remedies include limiting your alcohol, weight-bearing exercises, and good nutrients.
There are many treatment options now to treat osteoporosis, such as bisphosphonate medications like aldehyde and risdiplam. However, estrogen and testosterone replacement therapy used to be the only FDA-approved treatment option for osteoporosis. Now, in 2019, we know that the best time for women to begin estrogen replacement therapy is during early menopause. While estrogen and testosterone replacement therapy isn't women and men's only option, it is certainly one of the most prominent options. As an osteoporosis patient, it is important not to rely entirely on medication as the only treatment for their osteoporosis. Weight-bearing exercises that improve balance and posture can strengthen bones and reduce the chance of fractures. In addition, good nutrition that contains enough calcium and vitamin D are important. Limiting alcohol is also another important factor.
So now that we're done with the presentation, let's check your knowledge. I've got 5 questions for you guys to write down and hopefully answer. My first question is, what are the 3 types of bone cells and what are their functions? The femur is composed of 3 parts. What are those 3 parts called? And what is osteoporosis and how does it affect a patient's femur? And the 4th is, what is the difference between the cancellous and compact tissue? What are a few types of treatment options for osteoporosis? So take a few minutes and write down your answers and let me know. Here are my references. Thank you very much.